Hi and welcome to another episode of Delaware County Political News, Meet the Expert. We are here again with Simon Campbell. If you didn't get an opportunity to see part one, please see Simon Campbell discuss right to know laws and anti-SLAPP suits. Simon, thanks again for being a guest on Delaware County Political News.
Always a pleasure, Larry. Thanks for having me back.
Simon, in addition to anti-SLAPP suits, you mentioned there are other issues that you've been involved with in your social activism. Can you give us some other examples?
Well, yeah, when I first moved to the States in 2004, I was not a political civic activist in any way. I was a regular person. And I found out within a year after we moved to Bucks County that the teachers were going on strike. I had no idea. And I had 2 kids at the time in public school district, my local district. No idea that teachers could go on strike. So I started doing research on the internet, and I found out that 38 other states don't allow public school teachers to go on strike. So I'm like, well, why do we do that in Pennsylvania? I mean, they shut the schools down for a month. It was horrible. We have some of the highest paid teachers in the entire state in Bucks County. So I got politically active at the time because of something that happened in my community. I went and found the right to know law, and I published all the teacher salaries, and I put them online. I said, this is how much they're making. That caused a stink. So I got involved in public sector union issues as a consequence or a result of a teacher strike affecting my own kids. And so since that time, I've been very active in trying to get a right to work law passed in Pennsylvania to end compulsory unionism. I had no idea until I started talking to some teachers that we have compulsory unionism in this Commonwealth, which to me is just abhorrent. I'm not a fan of unions, but I think if you are, then you should have the right to join and pay dues. But this idea of coercing someone and making them join or pay dues as a condition of their employment, that to me is just un-American. We need to live in a society where freedom of association means exactly that. You have the right to join and pay if you like unions and you think they're good for you, and you have the equal right to not join and not pay. And I've just worked very recently with a state representative, Jerry Knowles, to introduce a bill that would empower every public employee in this state, if it were to become law, with the choice of choosing either a union to represent them, or if they want to represent themselves. This idea of unions call it collective bargaining. I call it compulsory representation, because that's what it is. And we need to live in a society where the choice is with the individual. And I get into this debate with union bosses all the time, and they tell me, oh, it's in the collective good. And I say, you have a right to that view. You cannot force Sally Smith to accept your view, to pay for your view, to make her be a part of her union if she wants to negotiate her employment contract on her own. Stop bullying her, is what I tell them. And I make them mad, and that's life.
There's a lot there in that opening there, Simon, so I want to break it down a little bit. But we just discussed in another show in part one that part of how you get your message out is through YouTube and right to know requests, as you mentioned. And this is when you started looking into right to know in 2004 when you got here in that union strike. That's what motivated you to find it and to look into it in the first place?
Exactly, yes. I mean, back at the time when the teacher strike happened, actually it was in 2005, the teacher strike, November.
You got here in 2004.
I got here in 2004. Actually moved, born and raised in England, but at the time we were living in Switzerland for a few years, where they don't have teacher strikes. They're too busy teaching their kids to speak 3 languages fluently.
In England, though, they do have strikes.
There is a national teachers union. They're called the National Union of Teachers, or NUT, which is fine because that's what they are. But in Pennsylvania, they call themselves Education Association. Sounds so posh to me. I'm from England. If you're a union, call yourself a union, It's association, whatever. But yeah, what happened was I requested all the teacher salaries. Now, when you put out 800 individual names and salaries of teachers and you spread it all over town during a strike, it causes certain people to go, ah! But then what happens is it drives attention and awareness to the issue. And then all of a sudden people are saying things like, well, why do we allow teacher strikes when 38 other states don't? And I'm like, get in touch with your state lawmakers. So I'll do a video. Let's contact our state lawmakers. Let's have a law in Pennsylvania to become the 39th state to ban teacher strikes. So one incident becomes let's cause trouble with the salaries through the public records request, becomes let's get the message out there and lobby for a new law.
And an activist was born.
An activist was born out of nothing, right? I'm like, don't throw my kids out of school, union bosses, or I'll get mad with you.
And then you became a school director from becoming a leader on this issue.
Well, yeah, when I ran for office, I only served one term. I ran for office in 2009, so it's a few years after the strike. But I ran for office on a very openly hostile platform to the teachers' union. That's different than saying, you know, and they of course say things like he's anti-public education and anti-student, blah, 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 blah. They have their whole message. But my view on it is we have public education that exists for two people, students and taxpayers, not you lot. And so I ran on a very hostile platform to the teachers union, got elected, probably in part because of the backlash. A lot of people were very upset.
Sure, from the strikes.
From the strike,
Certainly.
yeah.
Okay.
And so I served one term. I think for myself, the way I am, one term in government is probably enough for all of us.
Simon, you were born and raised in the UK.
Yes.
You're a school board director.
No.
You were a school director for 4 years, and your children are being raised in this current school system, correct?
Yes. I have my three kids are American citizens, and
And you're an American citizen.
I'm an American citizen, naturalized. Yeah, I went through that whole process a few years ago. And so my kids have been educated in the US, and
You appear to be someone completely qualified to compare and contrast the two educational systems. Please give your observations of the difference between the two.
Well, of course, you know, one can't ever stereotype when one's talking about individual academic institutions, an individual school or an individual university. But if you're asking me for the helicopter view, if you will, it is very different coming to this country and seeing public education, you know, K through 12 compared to the UK. In the UK, in my opinion, the last 2 years of school, high school, you only study 3 subjects. They're called A levels, whereas here you do, you know, a much greater number of subjects. And the system in the UK, in my view, encourages teachers and facilitates students to think for themselves, to develop an ability to reason, argue, and structure their thoughts, whatever the academic subject may be, far more than in this country. So the education system through high school graduation is geared in the last 2 years towards, you get great familiarity and knowledge in 3 subjects because you only typically study 3 subjects in the last 2 years. But more to the point, what you're learning is how to think, how to structure and express yourself in written thought and in verbal thought, far more than the system here, which is much more oriented towards learning ABC and the concept of multiple choice. You know, I'm not a fan of multiple choice testing. What are you learning other than how to be a robot? I didn't do any multiple choice testing except in England, except for the very early years. You know, the last few years, particularly the last 2 years, you don't do multiple choice tests. And I think that parlays into the college system. My eldest daughter is now at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. She chose not to apply to the US for college, even though she was educated through here, in part, no doubt, because of my influence. And my second daughter is also applying to go to the UK to study, because the college education system and social and academic life is, again, very different. And if you want, I can talk about those differences. But, you know, I encourage them for 2 reasons. One, they'll spread their wings and live in another country, having been, you know, spent most of their life in the US, and get that perspective. But they will learn different things. They'll learn how to develop academically differently here.
Well, you've said differently enough times that I'm waiting with bated breath to hear just a little bit of specifics, because I do understand that in the British system that there's more of an emphasis on teaching how to think. And Michael Moore did a documentary about one of the European systems that emphasize on thinking and allowing someone to learn for themselves, and Michael Moore criticized the United States system for not doing that. So I'm curious to hear how you would compare and contrast those differences.
Well, to be politically incorrect, as I understand the first year at least of four-year college here, it's typically general education that you should have done in high school. In the UK, you apply for a major. You have to say as part of the application process what you want to study. Now, some people find that off-putting. But once you're in studying X, whatever the X is, and they used to use the expression in the UK, and I think they still do, what are you reading? You don't say what are you studying, what are you reading at university? And the reason for that is, when you're there, the amount of hours that is spent in lectures and in tutorials isn't that great. The system is geared towards a lot of independent time, reading, studying independently around the subject that you are there to read for. And then you get together with your tutors, and then you have the lectures, and they expect you to come to a tutorial armed with an ability, because of the independent study you've done, to then discuss, debate, and analyze whatever it is the subject is. And when you write written papers, they want to see independent, original thinking. And so the entire academic focus is about developing you as a person academically, not just learning A, B, C, D, E, and F, and then being tested on whether you know A, B, C, D, E, and F, which I think is more the system here. And so candidly, I do think it is a better system, not to say there are world-class universities and colleges in the US, no doubt about it. But if you're asking me as a general helicopter view, there's a reason my kids are going there, and it is my influence, because I want them to develop themselves, not just learn stuff.
Going back to the union issue, you complained that school teachers were required to join a union, and you said it's compulsory and un-American.
Yeah.
And before I actually go on with that thought, compare and contrast English freedom to United States freedom. After 200 and some years after our Constitution was born, what is England's sense of rights and liberties in comparison and contrast to the United States?
You know, it's interesting. You know, the UK is kind of it's a strange place, the UK, because rather than coming out of a revolution, you know, this country was born on a certain date when the revolution occurred. England, the UK, is one of these places where we've evolved over centuries, you know, where we had kings that would chop your head off if you didn't speak the right way, and now the Queen would never chop anyone's head off. But there was never a revolution in that. It's more been of an evolution to a civilized, democratic country. We don't have a constitution in the UK. We have a history, if you will, an evolution. And so I actually am a huge fan of the United States Constitution. I love it to death. I love the fact that you have a Bill of Rights that no one can take away from you. I wish sometimes we had that in the UK, because while we are a very evolved and mature democracy, there's something nice about knowing that no matter what anyone in government wants to do, if this is the United States, you cannot take away my right to free speech. If they pass a law in Congress saying free speech is being restricted, you go to the judicial branch, the separation of powers, and they will say, you can't do that. In the UK, because we're a parliamentary democracy, all power is inherent in the government. If 51% of people in the government vote for restricting free speech in some way, that's the final word. Not so in the US. So I liken the difference this way. You know, democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to eat for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb who can test the vote. And we are a constitutional republic in the United States. We're not a democracy. We have democratic principles built in, but nobody pledges allegiance to the democracy of the United States. We pledge allegiance to the republic. And I consider myself a Republican, and I use that word, and then people immediately think of a political party. It's true that I'm registered that way, but more fundamentally, I consider myself a Republican because I live in a republic and I love the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And so while I compare it to my home country, if you will, where I came from, I always feel I'm free and I'm democratic, but there's just something awesome about the revolution and the Bill of Rights in this country. It's just awesome.
Now going back to the union issue,
Yeah.
here is what I want to take issue with. And again, not for a right and wrong issue, let's learn from this discussion. The statistics appear to show that the teachers who are unionized, like in public education, seem to be much more well off, well compensated, have more rights as employees than charter school teachers that are non-unionized. Is that not your experience or your observation?
No, I don't think it's an issue of rights. I think they have a bullying entity that can get them more stuff.
Okay, but not that can, but through practice, through observation, that actually do get them more stuff. Is your issue not that it's not good for what I've seen from your interviews online, that it's not good for the general people, our society?
Right.
That's what I have gleaned from your discussions.
Well, let me just
more so than maybe an individual doesn't want to join this particular union, but it's not good for the entire group.
I think there's two issues here. One is
I do too.
One is I don't support collective bargaining in government.
In theory.
In practice, I don't believe that any group of employees should be allowed to organize against the public. Now, private sector, do what you want.
My next
I don't
question.
care. I would eliminate government unions, public sector unions, because it is the employer is not a business. It's not some guy making cars and a profit. This is public money. This is tax dollars. If you're a senior citizen and you can't afford your school taxes, they will put your house in a sheriff's sale. And so
hold that thought for one moment. Let me build on that issue right there. So Simon, anytime that you say right to work, you're talking about public right to work. You're not talking about private entities. Is that fair to say first?
Oh yeah, I have far less of an issue with the construction unions, the trades unions, because they're operating in the private sector.
So when you come out and you're talking anti-union, you're talking about anti-public union, specifically teachers.
Well, all government unions.
All
we have
government unions.
state workers union, because they're organizing against us. They're organizing against our tax dollars.
Okay. Now, but one way that's one issue, that's one argument. You're saying they're organizing against people's tax dollar, public money.
Yes.
That's one issue. But when you say it's an un-American choice, suppose the practical effect of that is actually much higher benefits, though.
Right.
Now,
okay.
Isn't that saying, well, you have to join this union because that union got you maybe 30% more of an income?
I want you to pretend, Larry, you're a union boss.
Well, first of all,
because this is a good debate.
No problem. I understand that. But let's just break it down by issue. But first of all, do you recognize that teachers who are in public unions, at least it looks like statistically, are making far more and at least have better benefit packages than the ones that are in maybe work privately or are in charter schools? Can you recognize that?
The structure of your question is misguided, and I'll explain why. One is the collective group organizing against the taxpayers shouldn't exist. Let's now look at it from the perspective of the union boss that says you're a union boss and you come to me and I'm a new employee and I've signed up and you're a union boss, and you say, look, statistically, you join the union, we're going to get you better benefits, we're going to get you better things than all the other things, and let's say you're right. I will support your right, Larry. I will support your right to sell me.
I wanted to break it down.
And if I say to you, my name's Simon, Larry, thank you for your sales pitch and showing me why the union's great and showing me why you're fantastic, and I appreciate the time you took. However, Larry, I've decided that I'm a really good math teacher. In fact, I'm better than most of the people in this building. So while I appreciate your sales pitch, I've decided to go and negotiate my own contract. Question, Larry. If I've heard your sales pitch and I want to go negotiate anyway, do you still want to make me join the union? Or do we live in America where I choose? Oh, look, he's the one who answered the question. See, what this question is all about, Larry, isn't about what I think. It isn't about what you think. It's not about what the union bosses are watching on video think. It's about you should have a right.
Simon, that's an impractical
Hogwash.
question.
Why is it that government union bosses believe they know and should be empowered by law to tell someone else what's in their best interest?
That is such a theoretical question. It does not apply.
How does Microsoft employ people? How does the guy that runs a flower shop down the street employ someone? They don't have a union.
You have some relationship. You have some relationship with administration as a former school district member, correct?
Yeah.
So you know darn well they're making a lot less than the current correct collective bargaining agreement that was signed almost in every union deal that was currently in place.
Who's making less?
Teachers that, first of all, let's just look statistically, private individual teachers or employees cannot come near negotiating a contract as an individual than they can. You mean each individual negotiate a contract based upon ability, not upon a group?
Yeah. Why can't they do that? I mean, Larry, I love educating you.
That's what you're saying.
Because here's the thing.
That's what you're proposing, correct?
What I'm proposing is if Sally Smith wants to talk to her building principal or her superintendent directly, you and I don't need to have a debate about it. They'll figure it out.
And it'll end up, the teachers as a whole, the median salary would be like 40% less.
Well, guess what? If Sally Smith goes, man, I just tried to negotiate on my own. This sucks. I need to join the union. You know what I say, Larry? Join the union. What they can't justify and what you can't get your head around is the concept of a law that forces Sally into the union. If Sally wants to negotiate on her own and it sucks, Sally should have the freedom to join the union. But what if she negotiates and they say, Dan, you're a good math teacher. We don't want to lose you. You're so great at teaching math. We're going to give you 10 grand more. Shouldn't Sally have the right to negotiate that?
All right, you've been on both. You've heard the arguments. What's the union argument for why there's compulsory?
The union argument is very simple. The union argument is very simple. They believe that a collective group should have a greater right than an individual. That's fine if they just want to go live in Cuba or China. This is the United States of America. Who should decide, Larry, what is in your best interest? You or someone else?
And there's no doubt the whole strength behind the union comes behind the right to strike.
It comes from behind the power to force people into a situation they don't have anything to do with.
Because
if unions were legitimate, Larry, if they were legitimate, and I don't have an issue with unions existing, I do in the public sector.
I understand.
But if they're legitimate, they should be able to attract workers to join them because what they're selling is good. If they were genuine, people would want to join.
However, it is genuine because they are. I will defer to Pat Gillespie.
Yeah.
Because they corrected the coal miner abuses, the industrial revolution abuses, and put in workers' compensation safety. It's union money, it's union collective bargaining that put in all those workforce safeties back in the early 1900s.
That may be so, but today we have federal and state laws that take care of all of that. So the bottom line is, I'm not here to say the union shouldn't exist. I'm just saying they shouldn't be able to force someone into it.